As more people connected to the Jeffrey Epstein case continue speaking out, new testimony is putting fresh attention on the powerful names that once surrounded him. And with survivors now publicly sharing what they say happened behind closed doors, some online are asking whether people tied to Epstein's circle, including celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres, could be getting nervous about what may still come out next. Some even believe Ghislaine Maxwell may be quietly warning old friends and associates such as Ellen, especially because there have been new developments that could change everything. At a hearing in Albany, New York, two women publicly spoke for the first time about what they say they experienced with Jeffrey Epstein as teenagers. Both described years of fear, shame, and emotional trauma that they say kept them silent for decades. One of them was Alexandra Golimatis. Standing before the New York State Senate, she introduced herself as a victim and survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's. She said it was the first time she had ever spoken publicly about what happened to her. "Hello, my name is Alexandra Golimatis, and I am a victim and survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. This is the first time I have spoken out publicly, and what happened to me. Thank you to the New York Senate for listening to my story. I grew up in Queens, New York. Growing up, I enjoyed ballet class and playing outside with my friends. I met everything when I was a minor. After I met him, he manipulated, forced, and tricked me into situations I felt I could not refuse. The first time he said me, I was 14 years old. What was going through my head was overwhelming fear, shame, and confusion. He abused me like this for years. Every time was similar, except one time he used my vulnerability against me and began escalating his behavior. Because I was to Epstein, I have suffered deep shame and depression. I have been afraid to come forward because I feared the emotional and mental impact it would have on me, to speak about what I experienced. The Epstein estate has refused to help me because they are arguing that the state of limitations means that what happened to me is worth zero." Another survivor, Glendiz Espinal, also spoke publicly for the first time that day. She told the Senate she grew up in the Bronx and enjoyed softball, reading, and watching movies with friends and family. She said she first met Epstein during her sophomore year of high school. "My name is Glendiz Espel, and I am a victim and survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's. This is the very first time I have spoken out publicly or to anyone about what happened to me. Thank you to the New York State Senate for listening to my story. I grew up in the Bronx, New York. Growing up, I enjoyed playing softball, reading, and watching lots of films with my friends and my siblings. I met Epstein when I started my sophomore year in high school. After I met him, he manipulated or tricked me into massaging him. At first, it began as massages, and he would touch and rub areas until I CL, and I say that because I would fake it, because it was so uncomfortable. What was going through my head at the time was just pure shame, intimidation, and I just could not wait for it all to be over and get out of like this from 2005 to 2008. Every time was similar, then it started escalating from massages, because I wozig to Epstein. I have suffered till this date from PTSD, extreme anxiety, and depression." After hearing their testimony, lawmakers praised the women for speaking publicly about such traumatic experiences. One senator told them they had nothing to be ashamed of and called them incredibly brave for coming forward. "Let me start by saying this. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You are incredibly brave. You were the victims. Okay, let's be clear about that. Okay, I can't imagine what you're going through. And I think this from everyone we've heard from today. I think it answers the very first question I had in why does it take time? Because it is painful. It is scary. You have those doubts. You have those thoughts. But I'm sure everyone echoes what I'm about to say, and that is, you have nothing to be ashamed of." This reveal, particularly the mention of how these girls were recruited into Epstein's organization, has caused many people to wonder whether we'll see renewed attention turned to Ghislaine Maxwell for her role in the crime, and also just how involved Ellen was in it. And it isn't just these two testimonies that have everyone talking about what could happen. We've also had a journalist by the name of Matthew Steeples recently make some revelations that could completely change the way we look at all of this. I guess one thing I can ask you to put into words. I think Looney said that children as young as 8 were taken to the island, or 12. It was very young age. The youngest I've heard referenced in the context of Epstein were 2 twin girls from Paris that Jean-Luc Brunel supposedly gave for his birthday. He was given these twins, and they were taken from some poor parents in some poor part of Paris, or I believe, and no one knows what became of those. They were 12. They were 7. 7. 7. Yes. That's the youngest reference I've heard. Is it fair to say that Epstein and Andrew is a separate question? There's 2 questions. Where we have to use silly language on YouTube, but PDF files or PE files? Epstein, if you believe somebody called Jay Beecher, and Jay Beecher is somebody who works for, effectively, the Maxwell family. He's been paid $80,000 by a man called Brian Basham, who is their spokesman for writing a book. Jay Beecher and a lady called Jessica Reed Krause, who's very much one of these MAGA influencers. They have a podcast where they talk about how Jeffrey Epstein was not what you call a PDF. He was actually like Hugh Hefner. And they compare him to Hugh Hefner, and he just like, bit of fun in young girls, and I think that is absolutely reprehensible and wrong, and it's proven to be wrong because why have these people been paid out? You don't pay to someone you didn't do something to. And that's what everybody has said of Andrew all along. Why it was £12 million or whatever sum it was paid, and again, what we need now to know, and it must come out, is what was the sum actually paid, and who paid him. This interview then took an even stranger turn when Steeples compared the Epstein case to that of former British publicist Max Clifford. He claimed that in Clifford's criminal case, many victims described similar physical details, which investigators reportedly saw as part of a pattern that helped support their testimony. Who was a publicist in Britain, who worked with a lot of these people, represented by the same lawyers as Mandelson, for example, Mishkandare, with Clifford. It was the size of his anatomy. All the victims said it was very small. Is that right? I didn't know that about, and that was a consistent theme with victims of Max Clifford, and that was one of the main reasons he was convicted. Wow. And with Epstein, he had very deformed parts of his body, supposedly. Really? I didn't know that either. There's a lot of discussion this, and I think given his activities, I would probably say he was probably a bit like McGab, probably suffered with all sorts of diseases. When you are as prolific as that kind of activity, you are more susceptible to suffering such illness. The conversation also interestingly turned toward Prince Andrew and the reported settlement involving Virginia Jew. The British public are starting to say, was it the taxpayer paying this, or was it the Queen, or was it King Charles, or was it a combination of all of it? And where did it actually go? And what did Virginia actually get? Because the charity Virginia was involved with didn't get it, nothing seems to have occurred with that. So the trail of that money is also very curious. But coming back to these victims, the victims I know have been paid money, and they were settled, and a lot of the settlements were made by banks because these banks would rather just pay a bill and know how to get rid of the negative publicity. So of course, there are people who now come out of the woodwork who are fake. So you get a lot of people who will be making things up saying, I was a victim. You get that in any kind of situation of this type. But so many of them tell consistent stories of things that happened. And in fact, the Virginia news has caused so much uproar because previously unseen footage is now surfacing that could end up connecting Ellen to none other than Ghislaine Maxwell. In the clip, Ghislaine can be heard saying she did not believe Epstein died by I do not believe he died by. And do you believe that, do you have any speculation or view of who him? No, I don't. That means he had powerful collaborators. That statement has fueled years of speculation online from people who believe Epstein may have been silenced because of what he knew about wealthy and influential figures. But we have to start with Jeffrey Epstein because the way you have written about him, it connects to a whole world of corruption. Yeah. Is he kind of the Rosetta Stone? Yeah. I think it's sort of like a meta scandal. You're looking at someone who really had, I guess, for lack of a better metaphor, had his hands in a lot of pies, right? Right. So, he was sort of at the center of a lot of scandals, but not necessarily at the top, right? I think he was more maybe middle management in a sense, but very central to a lot of these things going on that sort of these networks in which he inhabits are involved in, you know, numerous acts of corruption simultaneously. And he, you know, was there involved in many of them, but not necessarily at the top level, right? So, was he a spy? I think he definitely had intelligence connections, and there's a lot, to suggest that was the case. I think one of the earliest hints we heard of that was having a Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta, under Trump, say that one of the reasons he was pressured into giving Epstein a sweetheart deal during his first arrest in Florida was because he had been told by unspecified actors that Epstein belonged to intelligence. But that's kind of, what exactly does that mean? Was he an asset? Was he on the payroll? Which intelligence agency? Multiple intelligence agencies. When you have his close association with someone like Ghislaine Maxwell in the mix and her father had affiliations with numerous intelligence agencies, it really is an open question. He was kind of a bad guy, and reading your work about him and explain who he was. So Robert Maxwell was involved in many things, but he definitely played a major role in undermining U.S. national security by selling bug software to nuclear laboratories in the United States. And this was directly facilitated by well-known statesmen in U.S. history like Henry Kissinger, for example. And a lot of the people I think that enabled him, at least on the U.S. side, tend to be those that favor global governance. And, they kind of don't want the U.S. to have that kind of monopoly on power. One name repeatedly pulled into these online conversations is Ellen DeGeneres. People have pointed to the timing of Ellen ending her talk show, her move overseas, and the public backlash she faced over workplace allegations as reasons some internet investigators continue speculating about possible deeper connections. Look at it. Oh well, you know where that is too, right? The similar image to that, right? No, I know Jamie does. What is it? It's on the set of a famous talk show that's now not on anymore. Oh, Ellen. Was that Ellen? Yeah. Really? Just look at the temple and then look at let me see Ellen's background. What? A particular point of discussion right now is how Maxwell allegedly recruited vulnerable girls into Epstein's world. Former victims describe being approached with offers of money, work opportunities, or massage jobs before situations allegedly became abusive and difficult to escape. One survivor described Maxwell as polite, educated, and trustworthy at first glance, almost like a comforting public figure. According to the testimony, that image made it easier for victims to lower their guard. The lawyer continues to press for clemency in exchange for her testimony, something President Trump has continually declined to rule out. How does this all make you feel? It's honestly very disturbing to see these images of her and have her be looked at as someone who could potentially be providing any kind of information in this case. I mean, she has refused over and over to cooperate with the investigation. She doesn't have any empathy or has not expressed any empathy or remorse to her victims. So I think it's highly problematic that anyone would consider negotiating with a serious criminal like this. And I think it would just really be indicative of guilt in some way, because we know that she is not a credible source of information. And you say to her victims, as you know, she has repeatedly said that she had no involvement directly with I can speak, very personally to the fact that that's not true. She was towards me, and there's so many other crimes that she committed that she wasn't even prosecuted for. There were 4 of us that testified at her trial, but I have now met so many women who say it was because of Ghislaine Maxwell that I ended up being abused sometimes for years, and that she was at times involved in that abuse herself. So she was a very central figure in this system. And her efforts to minimize her role have not been effective. We've seen in the files that have been released already, several places where the emails she sent are contradictory to things she said on the record before about knowing Virginia Roberts-Jouet, for example, about the photo of her with Andrew Windsor. And so I think the more information we have, the more clear it is that she is not a credible source of information. Critics argue that Maxwell's wealthy background and calm personality helped normalize behavior that many victims later described as traumatic and manipulative. very interested in having his family be like the Kennedy family, a political power dynasty. And that's part of why he started moving into New York City around, just a year or two before he ended up dying. And Ghislaine Maxwell was sent to New York sort of to be his emissary, into the US. And he wanted her actually to marry a Kennedy, and this is attested to in, past mainstream media reports, and you can see his efforts to get her close to, I think, one of the sons of Robert F. Kennedy, and also John F. Kennedy Jr., trying to get her sort of in that social tier because he sort of saw that as, would advance his power, and also, that of his children. And I think if you look a lot at the psychology of Robert Maxwell, he seems to have had narcissistic elements, and that could be because of the trauma of his past. And a lot of times, narcissistic parents see their children as extensions of themselves. And so, that he's looking at how to build an empire and using his children to that effect. And you sort of see that with the psychology of Ghislaine Maxwell. Former accusers also described how the situation allegedly escalated once they were inside Epstein's network. Several women claimed they were pressured into uncomfortable situations while still very young teenagers. One victim remembered being mocked for wearing underwear with hearts on them because, according to her testimony, the younger you look, the better it is. Commentators in the resurfaced footage argued these were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger organized system involving many employees and associates. Virginia herself once claimed that numerous staff members, including drivers, housekeepers, medical professionals, and assistants, were aware of and either ignored it or failed to report it. As speculation spread, people began examining public behavior from celebrities and wealthy figures connected to Epstein, socially or professionally. Some pointed to sudden career endings, overseas moves, mansion sales, or major image changes as suspicious timing. Again, these are largely online theories and interpretations rather than proven facts. A lot of people have also pointed out criticism of Ellen's workplace culture during the final years of her talk show. Former staff members had previously accused the show of fostering a toxic work environment, with some saying employees felt intimidated backstage. Ellen has always been a mean person, and it's not, she had her dust up with the press and these stories probably 2 or 3 years ago. But I did her show, and I mean, look, I'll tell you truthfully sort of how it works when you do every show. Every show has its own kind of personality. The show itself, not the on-air show, but the behind the scenes. They all take on sort of the personality of their leader. And it's sort of like when you go into a business and people are always all friendly, or they go into a business and everyone's sort of douchey, and you're going like, why is everyone so mean and crappy in this business? It's the owner is that way. No, and so when you would go do Letterman, I'll start here. When you do Leno was fun and breezy and easy, and people were nice, and they were kind of laid back, and they weren't looking over their shoulder at all, and it was very kind of laid back. And Kimmel's show is laid back and nice, and people are nice, and Letterman's show, people are scared, or they were scared when I did 2 times I did. They're scared because Dave would scare them, and Ellen's show, people were scared, real scared. And I knew they were scared because it's like I was just sitting in my dressing room, and their segment producer came in and he went, "All right, so we've went over all the stuff we're going to talk about, Christmas Vacation or whatever it was." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're not going to talk about meat or beef or anything like that, right?" And I go, "No, I'm not. I'm just going to talk about the stuff we talked about going on vacation at Christmas, or the kids, or their anecdotes, Okay. All right. Okay. All right." And he came back 20 minutes later right before I went out, and he's like, "Okay, but don't talk about beef or meat or any." And I was like, "You got 2 warnings?" "Yeah. Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, this guy's scared to death." The resurfaced recordings also brought renewed attention to strange emails and coded language such as pizza and beef jerky found in some Epstein-related communications. Internet investigators debated whether phrases involving food, animals, or coded nicknames had hidden meanings, especially when they connected them to some of Ellen's behavior and obsession with pizza. Pizza? 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 Send pizza to Bobby. What does a gynecologist and a pizza boy have in common? They can smell it, but they can't eat it. May I bring in your slice of pizza to you? Pizza party was great. We had a lot of fun. Stayed late. We all slept in yesterday morning. Your night was good. Also up there, spoof on chandelier. The video I sent you with the amazing little girl dance. If you take a look at the recent emails released by the DOJ FBI dealing with Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of people have been pointing out that there are hundreds of messages that reference pizza, and some of these messages just don't really make sense. For example, right here you can see in 2016 an email was sent to Epstein subject the pizza monster. Jeffrey wrote, "She looks pregnant," and the person responded, "We don't know who that was. You mean radiating a soft glow with a look of bliss and excitement? Yeah, that's the pizza." So what that means, we still don't know. There are also a few references in these emails to pizza and grape soda. As you can see here, Harry Fish writes to Jeffrey Epstein in 2018, "What time do you want to get pizza and grape soda tomorrow?" In a different thread of messages, this same guy sends Epstein a photograph of a slice of pizza with a bottle of grape soda. And he references this again. First, we get a slice of pizza with grape soda, then the Pop-Tart. In a different message chain, he messages Epstein again and says, "Pizza and grape soda, enough said." And then on a different date, I don't know if this is the same hairy guy sending this to Epstein, but an email is sent to Epstein that states, "This is better than a Chinese cookie. See attached. Let's go for pizza and grape soda again. No one else can understand. Go." You can see there are so many messages referencing pizza. A lot of people think that this is obviously code speak. I wanted to let you know the crew really appreciated the pizza today. Thank you for letting us do that. And then there's a disturbing headline on these emails between Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and Jeffrey Epstein, where the subject is slicing a pizza. Obviously, that's kind of morbid sounding. There are also a chain of messages that seem to show Epstein sending someone to get an actual mold made of their butt cheeks so that he can make pizza. I mean, just pause these messages and read them for yourself. They're literally trying to make, as they say here, a butt pizza mold. This girl, I'm assuming, is a victim and is being sent here to get a mold made of her behind so that Epstein or others can make pizza in the shape of her. It's just so shocking and disturbing, and that is why the story continues dominating public attention years later. To many observers, this no longer feels like a scandal involving only Epstein and Maxwell. Instead, they see a much larger network filled with unanswered questions, missing details, sealed documents, and powerful names that continue surfacing again and again. How do you think the story ends? Let us know in the comments below.